Hi there, thanks so much for joining me today. I'm Jackie, and if you joined me for last week's video, you would have seen what I did to create this sweet little sea glass project. A little sea glass flower on a piece of glass that was sprayed with this seafoam colored spray paint. And I'm really happy with the results. So I decided I'm going to try another one. So in this video, I'm going to show you a variation on a theme, another flower, but sometimes when you do something, if you do another one and you vary it a bit, it gives you a few more ideas of how to do things and how to just change things up a little bit to make it a little bit different. So I really hope that by watching me do this one, and then this one, it inspires you to try a few different things with your sea glass. So join me for this video. I hope you find it fun. So for this project, what I am going to use, I have this 8" by 8" black frame, and what I've done is I've taken the glass out, I sprayed it with this Krylon Sea Glass Seafoam paint, and then just one little light coating, and then I put it into the back of the frame, and I put a bead of silicone all the way around to seal it in place. And then that's going to keep the glass there, and then I'm going to do my flower on top of it. And I also have some nice big white pieces of sea glass, a nice stone here, a really nice white rock, and a piece of driftwood, a couple of pieces of green sea glass, some brown sea glass, and some rocks. So this is a bit of a variation on the flower I showed you last week. And the paint that I'm using for this one, I have some Viridian green and some vermilion, which is kind of like a reddish orange. And I've got my Quick Seal Kitchen and Bath Adhesive Caulk that I use for a glue. I've got some really fine-tipped paint brushes and my stick for cleaning up any messy bits. And I'll show you what I do with this one. So I'm going to set my paint aside because I want to put all the sea glass in place and let it set before I do any painting. So usually when I'm doing a sea glass mosaic, I'll glue as I go. But for a project like this, where it's kind of small and I'm using larger pieces, I really like to get my pieces in place and make sure everything is where I want it to be before I start gluing. And it's small enough that I can do that. And I'm just going to do my inukshuk. So I always do an inukshuk in my pieces as a way to symbolize that I was here. So in a small piece like this, the inukshuk can become a bit of a focal point, which I quite like, because all I have really is the flower is the focal point, and the inukshuk is like a secondary focal point. And you know, when you're walking on the beach, sometimes it's really hard to walk by some of these really stunning pebbles. I know they look more stunning on the beach when they're wet and really shining up at you than they do once you get them home, but they're still pretty spectacular. So a little piece like this is a really nice spot to showcase some of those really sweet pebbles that I find I just can't walk by. Like, they're just too inviting. And then I can glue everything in place because it is where I want it to be. So I'm just using my Quick Seal Adhesive Caulk, and I'm just going to put some on the back. This works really well with driftwood. That's just a piece of driftwood that I found at the beach. And I find that with larger pieces of sea glass, because here I'm featuring some of my larger pieces, typically I really like, if I'm doing a smaller mosaic, I like to use really small pieces of glass, but here using some of the bigger ones gives me a chance to showcase some of those really spectacular pieces of sea glass. And when I'm using bigger pieces, you have to use a little bit more silicone to make sure it all stays in place. And these are ones that are going to be really nice hanging in a window. That's why I'm hoping that the seafoam spray, seafoam colored spray, really shows nicely when this is hanging in a window. So I'll just finish gluing these in place, and then I'm going to, even though I want to embellish it a bit with paint, I'm going to let this sit overnight before I start fussing with any paint, because I don't want to move things out of place when I'm painting. So I let that set overnight, and now the sea glass isn't going to move out of place while I put the tiniest bit of paint on it, just to add a little bit more detail. So I'm going to take this vermilion, sort of like a reddish orange, and just have the little bit of drop of that, not very much, because I'm only doing the tiniest bit. And then I have a bit of this Viridian, it's like a green, but a bit of a bluish green. I'm going to use a tiny bit of that. And again, really tiny. So, just wet my, I've got my finest tip brush here. Just going to wet that a bit. Do a little test on my little palette here. And then I'm going to do some of the tiniest little dots on my rock here. And to me, it just makes the rock a little bit more interesting. So it's not natural, which you may not like, but I'm all about creating a bit of interest. I just love these white rocks. When I'm at the beach, I see so many of them. They kind of remind me of peppermints. And I can't resist picking them up. When I collect things at the beach, I tend to keep things in jars. I sort them by category. And I have more than a couple of jars of white rocks. And it's just like seeds in the middle of a flower. And when I'm doing a little bit of painting on some of my sea glass pieces, I don't want it to look perfect, because it's not a perfect painting, and I don't like my work looking really perfect. I'm dealing with sea glass and rocks and things that are coming from nature, and nature doesn't create things perfect. No straight lines in nature, except for the horizon line. Now, the other thing I want to add are a few green stripes on my white pieces. So they're kind of like stemmy things on the petals of the flower. So I've got a small straight edge brush here. Dab that in my water a bit. Now with this, you might want to practice on your palette before you try to do anything. I like to do that. Now this doesn't have to be perfect the first time, because get your paint while it's wet and you can wipe it off fairly easily. So when you finish a piece, it's important to stand back and look at it and decide, how does it all work together? And I stood back and looked at this one, and I decided there's something missing. There's too big of a gap between the center of my flower and the petals. So I decided I'm going to get another layer in here. So I got some of my small green triangle pieces, and I'm going to put them on end so they stick up. So to put something on end, I use my tweezers, and I go like this. So I have 7 petals, so I'm going to do 7 tiny little pieces of green that are going to add another layer between my center and my petals. And I think that's going to help finish this piece off nicely, because right now it does not look quite finished to me. Now I can just clean up some of my messy bits here, and then this piece will be finished. So I hope you found this interesting, a little bit different than the things I typically do, but maybe it'll give you some ideas of something different that you can do. So thanks so much for joining me for this video, and until next time, I hope you make it out to the beach, and happy sea glass hunting.